Welcome to the Friday edition of Juan's World. Going to do a little bit more cooking today, and behind me you can see my oven and then my other parts of my kitchen that you saw last time are over there. So you're seeing a slightly different view of my cooking space, and I thought we'd have the oven there because we're going to be doing roast chicken today. And roast chicken's always been kind of important to me for various reasons. When I was growing up in South Australia, we normally had roast lamb on Sundays for Sunday dinner, shoulder of lamb typically, and most of the time we ate the whole thing on the Sunday because there were 5 of us, and it was by contemporary standards in our part of South Australia at the time, the cheap meat. Lamb was plentiful. We, in both our first house where we lived and our second house, were surrounded by sheep pastures, and used to get into trouble when I was a little boy chasing the sheep around. The shepherd caught me. So sheep were plentiful, and lamb was really affordable for Sunday meat. We didn't have the best of meat all the week. Sometimes we had lamb stew made from the neck of lamb, so that's not a lot of meat. So we didn't have a lot of money, but we ate lamb quite a bit. But for special occasions, mostly for birthdays but also for Christmas, my mother would roast a chicken with all the trimmings. It would include roast potatoes, bread sauce, sage and onion stuffing, giblet gravy, a feast for us, and a chicken pretty much exhausted itself around all 5 of us. I used to like the drumstick, and sometimes my father would get another of the drumsticks. But then it would be shared out. You've got the 2 thighs and you've got the breast meat. My mother usually took the wings, which at the time I used to think was being a martyr. I realized only later in life that the wings are really quite wonderful. But that was a special meal, and it was very rare. And then later, when I first started cooking myself, when we first had a kitchen when I went to Oxford, and I was able to use a kitchen in my 2nd and 3rd years because I had an apartment which had a shared kitchen, I cooked a roast chicken fairly often because it was very easy to do. You basically just make sure that it's clean in and out, and you can stuff it or not, but you just put it on a baking tray, put it in the oven, and 45, 50, maybe an hour later, it's done, and there you've got it. And you can roast potatoes, and you can roast leeks, and carrots, and parsnips, all kinds of things you can do with it. So right now, I'm just going to show you the real basics. I'm going to show you how to roast a chicken, and how to roast the potatoes with it, and how to make gravy. And then subsequently, I'm going to show you what I do now that I live by myself. Like with a family of 5, the chicken was gone. My mother might make chicken soup with the bones, but it wouldn't be very good soup because we'd eaten all the meat. But when I live alone, I'll have maybe either 1 leg portion or 1 breast portion and some potatoes and some vegetables, and that's a solid meal for me. And then I've got 3/4 of the chicken left, so I can do all kinds of things. I can make chicken sandwiches if I wanted to, or a chicken salad. That's all possible. But what I'm going to show you is how I made a chicken curry with 1 part of the chicken, the other part of the breast, and then how I made chicken soup with the bones, because I took the the leg portions and froze them because I'm going to probably have 3 or 4 meals without the legs, so I'll put them in the freezer for later. So let's get started on our roasting. Now the first step in this chicken dinner is to start the roast potatoes. You see here I've cut up some potatoes into fairly large chunks, not peeled, scrubbed clean but not peeled, and then placed on a baking dish with a little bit of oil in the bottom because they need that for browning. And then they're going to go in the oven first. I'm going to let them cook for about 20 minutes before I put the chicken in. The temperature of the oven is going to be around 500 degrees Fahrenheit. It's around 250 degrees centigrade. Like whatever the hottest is that your oven will go. Now the roasties can go in with the oven cold and just turn it up as high as you possibly can and let it heat up. That's fine. By the time the chicken comes in, then the oven will be nice and preheated. Okay, so we're going to prepare the chicken for roasting, and I'm going to open it up completely. That is, I'm going to take my knife down the back and open it up. It's called spatchcocking. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see what I'm doing because I'm probably going to get in my own way as I'm filming, but I'll do the best I can. Ideally, I would take the whole back out. I'd make 2 cuts, but I'm a little bit lazy today, so I'm just going to go with 1. And you have to have a really sharp knife. This is my chef's knife. I've sharpened it up because you're going to be cutting through bone. So let's just go down this side. All right. As I said, I could go down this side as well and open it up, but I really don't need to. All I need to do is just open it up, and now I'm going to place it on my baking tray. All right, so I guess you can more or less see that opened up. I'll take a still of it in a little bit. What I need to do now is to dry it off. I don't want the skin to be at all moist, so I'm going to use paper towels and just pat the skin all over. I'm going to, in fact, there we are. I'm going to leave it out. I could even put a fan on it to make sure it gets really, really dry. That's what they do with Beijing duck. But I'm not really sure that that's absolutely necessary. But I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to cover it with oil and poke it into my very hot oven. So I just checked on the roasties, and they're doing quite well. I'll give them a few more minutes, and then I will put the chicken in. But before I do that, I want to just baste it with a little bit of regular cooking oil. You can use lard if you want to. That's quite common. What you're trying to do is get the skin nice and crisp, and to do that you really need some kind of oil. So I'm just going to brush it with a pastry brush so that I make sure that it gets everywhere. It's not quite so easy to make sure that everything gets covered if you just pour it on, but if you brush it on, then you'll get a more even coverage. Now in a few minutes I'm going to put this in the oven, which is now nice and hot. When I started the roasties, of course, it was cold, and that was all right for them because they can just cook at a rising temperature, whereas with this chicken you want to have it in the preheated oven right from the start. You don't want it to be cooking cold and then getting hot. The principle here comes from a book I read a long time ago called The Complete Chicken, and he recommends spatchcocking. He also recommends cooking at very high temperatures, because in Victorian England, when people roasted meats, they took them to the baker to roast because he had an oven, and typical households didn't, unless they had big household with a lot of servants and a lot of people who could keep a fire going in a brick oven, which is a laborious duty, and the average person didn't have that ability, and so they took their roasts, whatever they were, beef or chicken or turkey or goose, as in the case of the Cratchits for Christmas Carol, I took it to the baker, who early in the morning lit a fire in the brick oven and got the oven enormously hot, probably somewhere in the range of 700 or 800 degrees Fahrenheit. And then one by one he added the ingredients that people had brought to bake, and like really big joints of meat would go in first in the back, and then smaller pieces and poultry and so forth more towards the front. But they were very hot ovens, because what they had done is they had lit the fire, got it really, really just absolutely stonking hot, got the bricks just radiating enormous heat, and then they raked the fire out before they put the meats and later the cakes and breads and so forth in. So the flow of energy was from a very, very, very hot oven, slowly cooling down to very hot to hot, then to medium and so forth. And different things would go in and come out at different times. But the very hot oven was for the meats. And so you need to heat cook your meats at the hottest possible. The absolute reverse of what you're often told about cooking a turkey. And they say, well, put it in the oven at the highest temperature for 20 minutes and then turn it down to medium for 4 days. So, what you end up with is cardboard. When you cook a turkey or a goose or a chicken or a pheasant or any poultry at high temperature, it always comes out juicy. You just have to be careful to make sure that it gets cooked all the way through to the inside. And so sometimes you may need to cover it with foil if the outside is getting too burnt. But in the case of this chicken, not the case. And because you spatchcock it, because you open it up, it cooks really quickly. It's almost like grilling. Okay, so in a few more minutes I'm going to pop this in the oven, and then we'll just have to wait until it's time. I'll show you a little bit of basting maybe, if I can, because you may at some point need to just put a little bit more oil on the outside if it's not crisping enough. And you also need to turn the roasties periodically because they need to brown on all sides. But basically you just leave it alone. And here you can see the roasties, all nice and crisp and brown on the outside. I did have to turn them around a couple of times, use tongs or a fork, but tongs are better, just to make sure that they're evenly coated with the oil at all times that they're roasting, so that they get nice and brown on all sides. And now here's the chicken, and it's also beautifully golden on the outside. The skin's nice and crispy, and all the meat is really, really juicy. It's marvelous. Now the cooking times are about an hour in total. That means that you put the roast potatoes in, let them cook for about 20 minutes, and then put the chicken in and let it roast for about 40 minutes, something in that order. Now you see here that there's some dripping in the pan, which I'm going to use to start off my gravy. Now while the chicken is roasting, I'm also going to prepare some ingredients for a mushroom gravy. And the first thing I need to do here is to soak some dried shiitake mushrooms in warm water. They need to soak for maybe 30 minutes or so, so while the chicken is roasting they can just be sitting in water. And I'm also going to cut up a leek or two, and that will be the basis for my gravy. So the first step for making the gravy is to take some of the drippings from the chicken pan and put them in a skillet. They'll have some of the flavor of the roasted chicken in them. Sometimes I also used to keep some dripping pan. That's a very common English tradition to have a dripping pan, partly because a lot of people like to eat dripping on toast for breakfast. So I've got one leek chopped up and just barely sauteing in the dripping, and I'm going to leave it for some minutes. I want them to take on a little bit of color, not a lot of color, but so not fully brown, but enough color that there's a little bit of caramel flavor in the gravy. So I'll come back and show you that process as it's completed in a few minutes. So you can see they've taken on quite a bit of color, and that's going to be enough for me now. So I'm going to add some flour to make a roux. Okay, coming along nicely. Smells wonderful. Now, I'm only going to make a blonde roux this time. If I were making some Cajun dishes or Creole dishes from the South, I would darken the roux, but I don't want to do that here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the water that the mushrooms were soaking in, and not sure, yeah, I think I'll add the mushrooms as well. Might go, why not? What I'm doing is really making the gravy act as my vegetable as well, so that my full meal will be roast chicken, roast potatoes, gravy and mushrooms, and leeks, a tiny bit of leek. Now I need to just bring that up to a simmer. And we'll come back in a while. Now the gravy is simmering quite nicely, and I'm going to let it do its thing. I want it to thicken a little bit, and I also need the flour to cook, and that means that it's going to have to stay on the simmer for at least 10 minutes, just so that the flour gets cooked through and so that it reduces a little bit, and then we'll be ready to plate up. So here is the plated up meal. I've taken off some breast meat and I've added 2 roasties. I don't eat a lot these days. When I was younger it would be 4 or 5 or 6 roasties, but here 2 is quite enough. And some mushrooms and some gravy, and that's just a splendid lunch. Now what I have left is the chicken with the other half of the breast and 2 leg portions. I took the leg portions off and froze them, and now I'm going to show you what I did with the remaining meat that was not in the freezer. I'm going to make a curry with the other half of the breast meat, and I'm going to make chicken soup in 2 fashions. I'm going to make a chicken and vegetable soup, and I'm going to make chicken noodle soup. So hang on to your hats.
So if you're a family of 4 or thereabouts, then 1 roast chicken is pretty much going to be 1 meal. But if you're living alone like I am, then a roast chicken will serve at least 4 meals, maybe even more, but certainly 4. So I had my roast chicken and roast potatoes and gravy yesterday. Now today I have taken the gravy and watered it down a fair bit and added a lot of curry spices. I don't use regular curry powder. I mix my own with asafoetida and ginger, cloves, nutmeg, coriander, all kinds of things, cardamom. And so here I've got a curry sauce with most of the mushrooms still in it. I'm going to add some leeks, and I'm going to put in another piece of chicken from the chicken frame, the other breast. I froze the 2 leg portions, which is a drumstick and a thigh, because I don't want to have chicken for a week. So I'm just going to do this. But then I'm going to take the frame and I'm going to make chicken soup. So let's first of all do the curry, and then I'll come back and I'll show you about the soup. So I've added some leeks, and I'm going to add the chicken at the very last minute because the chicken's fully cooked and I don't want it to dry out, so I don't want to just poach it and poach it and poach it and have all the fluids drain out. So I'm just making the sauce a little bit thicker, and I'm incorporating the leeks so that they can flavor the gravy. And then when I'm ready to eat, I'll just add the breast chopped up just in time, and then I'll have my lunch.
Now we're just about ready to serve the chicken curry. I just need to heat this up a little bit, and I'm going to make some rice and maybe a chapati or 2, I don't know. But that will be my lunch. It's actually enough for 2 lunches. So now we've got 3 dishes already from the chicken. And over here in my stock pot, you can see I've got the rest of the carcass. The breast meat's been taken off, but I've left the wings on, and I've left a certain amount of meat in there anyway. I'm going to fill it up with water and bring it to the boil, and I'm going to add some celery and some carrots and some onions. So here you can see I've added carrots and celery and shallots, and going to simmer for about an hour or thereabouts. And I've actually added just a small amount of chicken bouillon just to enrich the broth a little bit, and I also managed to find some dried parsley to add, just to kick up the flavor a little bit, and some black pepper. Now that's going to make a really nice vegetable soup. But I also like chicken noodle soup. So what I did was I took the soup when it had been finished, that is with all the vegetables and so forth, and just strained off some of the broth, and I also took off a little bit of the meat from the carcass and put it in with the broth. And then I took a small amount of linguine and broke it up. My father-in-law used to make chicken noodle soup by putting the spaghetti or noodles or whatever it was in and cooking them, and then having an awful job cutting them up. And his friend said, "Why don't you break it up first?" And he said, "Oh yeah, well that's what I do. Break it up first, cook in the broth with the small amount of chicken pieces." And I was able to go to the market in between all of my different cooking expeditions here, and I found some fresh parsley, which is very, very uncommon here in Cambodia, but I found some, so I was able to add it to the chicken noodle soup, and so here it is. And here is the chicken soup plus vegetables, which is also a perfectly nice meal in itself. So I wouldn't say that the chicken noodle soup was one whole meal. The chicken and vegetable soup for me is, but I managed to get 4 meals off the chicken without even eating the leg pieces. So probably 6 meals in total. So there we are. That's roast chicken plus. If you like my videos, please like, please subscribe, and I will be back again on Tuesday with more having to do with the color and the color spectrum. Have a wonderful weekend.